Good morning and welcome to the May meeting of DASNY. It's great to have the members here. Those of you who had to travel, I hope it was worthwhile for you. Hope you were able to utilize the opportunity to be in New York City. If you didn't, then you should the next time. I know that there are those of you who have your back to this magnificent view, but I want you to, your backs to the view, but I want you to know that it is particularly splendid today. It's just fabulous.
You bring that up every time, so why don't and at the finance committee, we're reversing it.
We planned on doing that.
Well, somebody has made the decision to seat me in front of that column, so I really can't see very much.
Blaming it on Gerard.
Yeah. We also want to welcome Tracy Raleigh, who is here today representing the Department of Health. Tracy is a former DASNY employee, and I don't think we'd met before today, but it's good to have you here. Thank you for, what's it called, pitching?
Exactly.
All right.
Plus, her son is my grandson's friend.
So, it's a family affair.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to be back.
Thank you, Pete. We're going to get right into the meeting, but before I do that, I want to let you know that I'm going to ask for a motion for an executive session immediately after we approve the minutes, assuming the minutes are approved. And we'll get into that. Didn't want to surprise anybody. You've all had a chance to take a look at the minutes of our 13 April meeting. Are there any recommended revisions? Any questions about the minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve? Roman, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Sandra, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Since there is no opposition, the motion passes unanimously. May I have a motion, please, to go into an executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation? Gerard, thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, John. I'm sorry, Jonathan.
That is good.
All right. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Hearing no opposition, we are in executive session. We should have asked Bobby to stay.
Throw him for a loop.
You're the ones who stay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we're going to have, of course, Gerard, Mike Corrigan, Portia, Debbie, and Mike Cusack. Everybody else should go. The record will indicate we've just left an executive session, come back to a public session. During the executive session, no decisions were made other than to come back to the public session. With that, we will go to the second agenda item, which is the Finance Committee report. Mr. Romsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Finance Committee met yesterday afternoon. After initially adopting the meeting minutes from the April meeting of the Finance Committee, we advanced to discuss 6 offerings: New York State Department of Health, the Pitt bond, an NYU bond, Bridgepoint Health and Bridgepoint Care, Parker Jewish, and also Providence Rest. After some discussions on each of those offerings, the Finance Committee recommended that they be approved at today's meeting. I do note that on the New York State Department of Health offering, out of an abundance of caution, the State Department of Health rep recused himself from voting on that offering. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair, unless there's any questions.
Questions for Mr. Romsky? Hearing none, we'll move to the adoption of financing documents. Mr. President.
Thank you. Good morning. Behind tab 3 is the Little Flowers Union Free School District Special at School Districts transaction with Matthew Bergen presenting along with co-bond counsel Christopher Brutzel, Esquire of Squire Sanders, LLP, and Douglas Seaton, Esquire of D. Seaton and Associates.
Chris, Doug, welcome. Matt, you've got the floor.
I do. Thank you and good morning, everyone. Just to provide an update on the Little Flower Union Free School District, which is a special act school district. We have received the approval of the Public Authorities Control Board. Our seeker analysis is done. We have a commitment from First Niagara Bank, and as noted in the recent information, The initial term of the bonds is expected to be 7 years. The amortization of the bonds will be over 20 years. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Matt. Assuming that there are no questions for Matt, which of you will start the presentation? Thank you, Chris.
Morning. Before you for consideration is the adoption of the authority's Little Flower Union Free School District Revenue Bond Resolution, authorizing the issuance of one or more series of bonds for the school district, and a series resolution authorizing the issuance of up to $5,195,000 of bonds. Proceeds of the bonds will be used to finance repairs and renovations to existing classrooms and additional classroom space to provide adequate instructional space at the school. The bonds will be privately placed with First Niagara Bank by Piper Jaffray as placement agent. And as Matt just said, it is anticipated that the bonds will be issued at a fixed rate for an initial period of up to 7 years. At the end of that period, the bonds will be subject to mandatory tender. So prior to that, the institution will have to find a means of refinancing or negotiate a renewal with the purchaser. The general resolution before you is a new resolution providing for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds, each series separately secured from each other. And the bonds are special obligations of DASNY, payable solely out of the revenues, which consist of the payments made by the institution under a sublease agreement that Douglas will describe in more detail shortly. Payment of the bonds is secured by the pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the revenues, DASNY's security interest in the pledged revenues, and the monies and investments held in the funds and accounts established by the resolutions. The series resolution authorizes various officers to make the determinations described in our board letter, as well as to execute all documents and do all other things necessary to complete the transaction. In accordance with your guidelines, the series resolution also contains restrictions on the ownership and transfer of the bonds.
Good morning. Little Flower Union Free School District is one of several special schools authorized to provide education and related services to children for which DASNY has been authorized to provide financing. The institution operates its campus pursuant to a lease agreement with Little Flower Children and Family Services of New York, which lease is assigned to DASNY. Pursuant to a sublease agreement, DASNY will lease the campus back to the institution in return for annual payments, which are rentals. The sublease agreement is a general obligation of the institution, requiring it to make payments in amounts sufficient to pay debt service. The institution's payment obligations are secured by an assignment of building aid to be received by the institution from the state, pursuant to the education law, and an assignment of a portion of the tuition payable to the institution by local school districts and school services district that refer students to the institution. Building aid and Part 1 tuition for the institution is to be paid into a special account within the state controller held fund, payable upon certification by DASNY and subject to appropriation. If a local school district or social services district fails to pay Part 1 tuition, state aid or state reimbursements due may be intercepted by the state education department. The sublease agreement also provides that the institution must continue to operate its program. If it does not, the state may take such real property interest upon the payment of an aggregate amount of the annual payments due under the sublease agreement. As a condition to the private purchaser's purchase of all of the 2016 bonds, the sublease agreement may be assigned to the trustee, except for certain rights retained by DASNY and the state. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Doug. Are there questions for Matt or Doug or Chris? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Roman, thank you very much. Jerry, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. So none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you both.
Behind tab 4 is the New York State Department of Health transaction with partially presented along with co-bond counsel Howard I. Berkman, Esquire of Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, and B. Seth Bryant, Esquire of Bryant, Rabino, LLC.
Howard, Seth, welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The board is being asked to authorize and adopt 2 series resolutions in a combined amount not to exceed $150 million. to refund 5 series of the State Department of Health bonds. They're the Series 1999A, Series 2003, Series 2004, Subseries 1 and 2, Series 2005A, and Series 2006A. The final maturity of the bonds, proposed bonds will not exceed the final maturity of the bonds to be refunded considered in the aggregate. The public health law lists 6 facilities that are part of the Department of Health. They are the Helen Hayes Hospital, the New York State Home for Veterans and their dependents at Oxford, the New York State Home for Veterans in Western New York, the New York State Home for Veterans in the Lower Hudson Valley, the Roswell Park Cancer Institute. Those are 5. The revenues of those 5 institutions are required to be deposited into the Health Income Fund, and they secure the bonds that are being issued on behalf of these institutions. The 6th facility, which is the New York State Home for Veterans in the City of New York, has a separate fund. It's the Veterans Home Income Fund, and all revenues for that are basically all revenues from that institution are deposited into that fund. That particular institution and that fund is not a part of this financing. The proposed bonds will be secured by annual payments subject to appropriation made from the Health Income Fund. The Health Income Fund maintains a balance equal to 6 months debt service and is held by the state controller. The report specified really under security provisions gave you a little bit more information about that Health Income Fund. Again, it's a fund it's a segregated fund maintained by the state controller. Patient care revenues, including Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance company, and patient payments go into that fund. The rating on the bonds is expected to be AA2, AA. I would note that under current market conditions, as outlined in the staff report, the refunding provides gross debt service savings of approximately $28.2 million and a net present value benefit of approximately $28.2 million, which is approximately 17% of the bonds being refunded. There is a history of uninterrupted appropriation of debt service. And the other thing I would note is that the Health Income Fund has reported debt service coverage in excess of 20-1 in fiscal year 2015, and obviously this refunding would only enhance that coverage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Portia. Which of you will start? Howard?
Good morning. It's good to be here. You have before you for consideration 2 series resolutions under the Department of Health General Resolution, and they would authorize Department of Health of the State of New York Revenue Funding Bond 2016A in an aggregate amount not to exceed $150 million, as Portia said. The bonds are going to be, if this resolution is adopted, the bonds will be issued under the 1990 General Resolution that you've adopted long ago. The key points are the bonds are going to be used to fund all or portion of the series that Portia named and pay cost of issuance. The original bonds that are being refunded were issued to finance or refinance certain state-operated healthcare facilities. As Portia pointed out, the bonds are special obligations of the authority secured by a pledge of revenues and certain amounts held in the so-called Health Income Fund held by the state controller, as well as funds and accounts under the resolution. The revenues, that's the amounts that are due to the authority from the Department of Health pursuant to a loan agreement. Those revenues are semi-annual payments made on behalf of the Department of Health under that loan agreement. Payments actually come from the controller from amounts in the Health Income Fund. All patient care revenue from certain facilities are deposited in that Health Income Fund, and amounts in excess of the next 6 months of payments under the loan agreement are transferred to support operations of the facilities. As Portia mentioned, payment from the Health Income Fund is subject to appropriation. If the amounts in the Health Income Fund ever fall below the amount needed for payment, the department under the statute is to notify the appropriate state officials. There are 2 resolutions in front of you. It's expected that only one will be needed to be used. They're expected to be fixed rate bonds in tax exempt form. But the notion was, just in case the deal was going to be divided up into 2 times that they'd be issued, or if there was going to be a taxable and a tax exempt series, it was better to have the extra
series resolution authorized just in case we need it, but it's not expected to be needed. There's no debt service reserve fund in this deal, but there is a BU fund, and it has been used on occasion and is being replenished per the schedule for that kind of replenishment that's laid out in the loan agreement. Seth Bryant is going to take you through the series resolution.
Thank you, Howard. Good morning. As Portia and Howard have described before, you are two series resolutions. They are identical. As Howard just mentioned, anticipated that only one would be needed, but before you are two. Under the series resolutions, the members are asked to delegate to the authorized officers of the authority certain powers to set the terms and conditions of the bonds. The delegation of powers include the powers to sell the bonds at a public sale or private sale, provided that if the bonds are sold in a private sale, the purchasers shall pay a price that's not less than 90% of the principal amount of the bonds being sold. Other powers that are being delegated, that would be delegated to the officers, assuming the resolutions are passed, include the powers to determine the principal amount of the bonds to be issued, the maturity dates for the bonds, and any sinking funds and sinking fund dates and amounts, provided that the final maturity of any bonds to be approved would not be later than the maturity for any refunded bonds. The powers include the power to set the interest rate for the bonds, provided, however, that to the extent that the bonds are taxable bonds, the interest rate should not be in excess of 10%, and to the extent that they are tax-exempt bonds, the interest rate should not be in excess of 7.5%. Subject also to PACB determination of the interest rate for the bonds. Other powers that the members would be delegating to the authorized officers include the power to determine whether the bonds are tax-exempt or taxable, the denominations of the bonds, whether they are book entry bonds, and matters such as the redemption price for the bonds, and to the extent that there is a redemption feature, the redemption price should not exceed 103% of the principal amount of the bonds. Other provisions, delegations that are included in the series resolutions include the powers to set the terms with respect to any bond purchase agreement that's used to sell the bonds, continuing disclosure agreements, and the contents of the official statement for the bonds, assuming sold in private placement. That concludes my presentation. There are other terms, obviously, but that's a summary of the certain ones.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Howard. Are there questions for Seth or Howard?
Question for Portia.
Okay.
And it's not limited just to this particular transaction, but I'm looking at the BIC, the bond issuance charge that we charge to our public clients. Has there been any discussion about changes, elimination, or reduction in that charge?
There have not been any.
So we are continuing to charge the public clients.
Correct. You know, as per the discussions with the public clients.
Okay. And then just, I don't seem to have either of the resolutions.
No.
You don't usually get.
We do sometimes.
Not in the past.
Usually do. Yeah, we do sometimes.
The only resolution you would get would be a resolution to proceed, but this is a one-step, so we go right to the series resolution.
So this is the whole, this is the resolution, it's right here on the table.
Thank you so much.
We skip one. I mean, you can certainly take a look at them. They're a lot, they're what Seth said.
Yeah, I've got one here.
Everybody's got one. Portia, you mentioned the debt service coverage, which is historically the summary says was 14-1, exceeds 14-1. It was 20-1 last year?
Correct.
2015? Okay. Okay, thank you. And Howard, my ignorance, the health income fund, what you said ultimately at the end of that part of the presentation was that the in the event the health income fund does not have sufficient proceeds, then there are notifications given But what happens then?
Then it's up to the legislature to see if they
Okay,
want to appropriate. This just puts the issue in front of the
Okay.
appropriate state people.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transactions? Sandra, thank you. Is there a second? John? Thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Since there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously.
And I'm abstaining.
Oh, you know, I'm sorry, I meant to say that, actually, and I simply forgot, so it's not quite unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 6 is the New York University transaction with David Ostrander presented along with co-bond counsel Neil J. Kaplan, Esquire, Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, and Gabriel Marouse of Marouse Law Group, PC.
We missed Pitt.
You missed the Pitt transaction. Yeah, the Hunt tab 5.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Eyesight is bad.
Happens all the time.
Behind tab 5, correction. For the record, strike that. Behind tab 5 is the personal income tax revenue bond program transaction with Portia Lee presenting along with co-bond counsel Howard Berkman, Esquire of Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, and B. Seth Bryant, Esquire of Bryant Woodby LLP.
Seems like we were just
Seems to us that way, too.
Good morning. The board is being asked to authorize and adopt the necessary documents in order for the authority to issue multiple series of tax-exempt and taxable fixed-rate bonds to be issued at one or more times in an amount not to exceed $2 billion under the personal income tax bond program. The bonds would be sold either on a competitive or negotiated basis or a combination of both. The term will not exceed 30 years. The term of the refunding bonds will not exceed the term of the bonds to be refunded, considered in the aggregate. This transaction qualifies as a single approval because it's a new money transaction for one of the authority's programs, which are already in the authority's portfolio, and for which the bonds are issued pursuant to a supplemental resolution under a previously adopted general resolution. The bonds are expected to be issued to fund a number of programs in amounts that are set forth in the staff report, as well as to undertake a refunding of various series of bonds. The new money projects is listed in the staff report, and programs include programs like the City University of New York educational facilities, that's CUNY, for projects like ASRC, capital projects for SUNY upstate community colleges, capital projects for the Office of Mental Health, the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services. That includes both state and voluntary facilities projects, including projects like the OMH South Beach project, that's about $70 million, and certain tax credit projects as well. We would also reimburse the state or fund various environmental projects, including those that would be administered by the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Agriculture and Markets, the Department of State, the Office of Parks, Recreation and Historic Preservation, and others. This financing would also include reimbursement for funds that are already expended in connection with certain grants under the State and Municipal Facilities Program, that's a SAM program, including reimbursement for the Solar City project, that's about $165 million, and the Syracuse Film Hub project, that's about $7 million. And then those would be taxable proceeds. The financing also includes reimbursement and funding for other economic development grants under various economic development grant programs, and the refunding of certain bonds that are all listed in the staff report, but including but not limited to PIT bonds, a CUNY program, mental health program, state education department, as well as other state-supported debt. The current potential refunding candidates were all issued by the authority with the exception of certain PIP bonds issued by EFC, the Environmental Facilities Corporation. Their funding would be expected to be in the amount of approximately $1 billion. This is authorization, as I mentioned earlier, for both new money and refunding. It is expected, though, that we would be undertaking two separate financings pursuant to this authorization. The first would be a new money competitive PIT financing. The second would be the refunding transaction. As included in the staff report, you'll see that there's a saving analysis based on current market rates. The refunding provides gross debt service savings of approximately $137.4 million, net present value savings of approximately $132 million, which is approximately 12.4% of the bonds that are being refunded. As we've discussed on numerous other occasions, the bonds are secured by semi-annual payments made pursuant to the financing agreement between the authority and the state. The bonds are secured by set-aside of 25% of the personal income tax revenues pursuant to statute, and those revenues are deposited in the Revenue Bond Tax Fund. Current debt service coverage for all PIT bonds outstanding is approximately 3.9 times, and the bonds are expected to be rated AA1, AAA, AA+. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Portia. Howard?
Thank you. Good morning again. Portia hit just about all the high points, so I'll have a very brief presentation. You have in front of you a supplemental resolution that will authorize one or more series of PIT bonds in an aggregate amount not to exceed $2 billion. As Portia explained, there's both new money and refunding components to this authorization. It very likely could be done at different times. Among the new money projects are projects for the Department of Mental Health, and some of those go to the state facilities and some of those are for the so-called voluntary or 501c3 facilities. Some of those voluntary agencies are eligible to get federal low-income housing tax credits, which provides another source of capital for those particular homes, and that's very good. There's one other wrinkle attached to it. To do that, you have to get private activity volume cap from the state for those parts of the financing, and you always have before, so I'm assuming you will again.
And we've made that application.
Okay, these bonds are under the general purposes PIT resolution that you authorized a few years ago. And as Portia said, the security is the deposit of 25% of personal income tax collected into the Revenue Bond Tax Fund, and then pursuant to a financing agreement subject to appropriation that goes to pay debt service. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Seth.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Portia. Good morning again. I will describe the supplemental resolution before you with respect to this 2016-1 PIT bond. PIT bonds. Supplemental resolution delegates to authorized officers of the authority the power to set the terms of the 2016 bonds, and the delegation includes the power to set the terms, including the manner of sale of the bonds, whether in a public sale or private sale, provided, however, that to the extent that the bonds are sold in a private sale, the purchase price, therefore, should not be less than 90% of the principal amount of the bonds being offered. Other terms that are being delegated, that would be delegated to the authorized officers, include the power to determine the principal amount of the bonds being offered, not to exceed the $2 billion amount in the of the supplemental resolution. Other terms include the power to determine the date or dates of maturity of the bonds, the sinking fund amounts and dates for the bonds, except provided that to the extent that the bonds are refunded bonds, they shouldn't, the refunded bonds shouldn't exceed, in terms of maturity, the date of the bonds being refunded, and to the extent that they're new money bonds, the maturity should not exceed 30 years from the date of issuance. Other powers being delegated to the authorized officers include the power to determine whether the bonds are variable rate bonds, aside from capital appreciation and deferred income bonds, the power to set the interest rates for the bonds, And to the extent that the bonds are tax-exempt bonds, the interest rate should not exceed 7.5%. To the extent that the bonds are taxable, the interest rate should not exceed 10% for the bonds. And this is also subject to PACB determination as to the interest rate applicable to the bonds. Other terms that are being delegated or that would be delegated to the authorized officers include the power to determine whether the bonds are taxable or tax exempt, provisions related to any credit facility or credit support, provisions related to redemption features for the bonds. To the extent that there is a redemption provision, the redemption price should not exceed 103% of the principal amount of the bond being redeemed. Other powers being delegated include the power to determine the number of series for the bonds and matters such as the contents of the official statement, the terms of any bond purchase agreement, in terms of any continuing disclosure agreements and other necessary and customary agreements or instruments used in offering the bonds. Thank you.
Seth, thank you. Are there questions? Roman?
Not so much a question, but just an observation. Thank you for this statement of affordability, as it were, under the debt cap, both here and in the prior, and also for doing some chunk of this in competitive sale.
All right, thank you.
What was the last?
Some chunk of this in competitive sale.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Roman. Sandra?
Yes, the final maturity of the refunded bonds will not exceed that, will not exceed the maturity of the bonds that are being refunded in the aggregate. How is that determined? I mean, does that mean just that some bonds won't exceed and some will? Is there an average, or how does that work?
Excuse me, what it really refers to, really considered in the aggregate, is you look at all the refunded bonds, the bonds to be refunded, and you see what the final maturity of the longest of those bonds is, and that's one point. And the new refunding bonds, the final year of maturity of that entire group of refunding bonds can't exceed the refunded bonds' final maturity. So really, we're not so much dealing with the bond by bond by bond by bond, we're comparing one to the other, but rather we're looking, when we say considering the aggregate, we look at the whole set of refunded bonds, take the final maturity, and the whole set of refunding bonds and take the final maturity, and this hand has to exceed this hand. This hand can't exceed this hand.
Got it.
So basically, you're looking at all the years together.
Yes.
And the years lumped together then do not, then when divided,
That's correct.
exceed that.
So there can be some interim exceptions.
Right. And my other question is on the savings analysis. How does it work that we get net present value savings in years when we have no gross savings?
In the out years.
Yeah, that's a good question, Sandra. I don't know the answer to that.
Matt?
Matt?
Do you have an answer?
In that situation, you can have net present value savings and not gross savings if you actually shorten up the maturity by a couple months. So in other words, if you go from a 6/1 principal payment to a 4/1 principal payment, you could actually have PV savings, but not gross savings.
But isn't that a one-time then, a 1 year? The first year that you do it, rather than in this case?
I'm not as close to the numbers, but I think they're refunding a lot of different programs.
Exactly. And to the discussion earlier, and the point that Howard was making, a lot of different bonds that are being refunded.
So if you're doing it for 5 years, this is 5 one time?
Like, I think it would be
roll-ups.
like, let's say if it was 6/1 2040, it could potentially go to a 4/1 2040.
Right, and to the extent that there are a number of different bonds that are
Each
being
time you do it.
refunded, that's how you could see it in a number of different years.
Okay. This looked kind of magic that you could savings. It's
a great question.
Thank you, Matt.
Good question.
Great question. John, did you have any questions?
Thank you.
No, just other than the overall purpose of these bonds are going to be used for a variety of state purposes, some of which include projects, some of which may include projects that we really had no, the dormitory authority did not select or have any role in determining whether the project would go forward or not. This is merely a financing mechanism for the state of New York to proceed in business.
That's correct.
Howard, you touched on something that I guess I don't understand the end of the answer. But some of the OMH facilities are eligible for, as you pointed out, low-income housing tax credits under the federal law. It appears that we don't go to the federal authority, though, to secure those low-income tax credits, but rather that the state has some allocation of low-income tax credits in which we can somehow participate. How does that work?
Well, there are two types of low-income housing tax credits. One is for 9% credits, and that's for deals that are taxable. You can't do taxes on bonds for them. And you have to be awarded them by the state. The 4% low-income housing tax credit is what we're talking about here. Okay. That's given as of right to an entity that issues tax-exempt bonds and meets their requirements of low-income set-aside of a certain portion of the apartments for use by low-income people. So they get that automatically.
Wow, that's actually a very good thing. That's terrific. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you, Roman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Sandra. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? And no one is abstaining? The transaction.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Behind tab 6 is the New York University transaction with David Ostrander presenting along with co-bond counsel Neil Kaplan of Hawkins, Delafield and Wood, and Gabriel Marouse of the Marouse Law Group.
Neil, Gabriel, welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd first like to bring your attention to the Black Line credit summary and staff report that was distributed to the board on May 9th. I'll just point out that the only change from that report from the original is the change in the not to exceed amount. I think that's also reflected in a Black Line fund. So the board is being asked to adopt 3 series of tax-exempt and/or taxable fixed and/or variable rate bonds in an amount not to exceed $1,062,500,000, with maturities not to exceed 35 years on behalf of New York University. The current plan of finance is to issue 2 series of bonds through a public offering, 1 taxable and 1 tax-exempt, all fixed-rate bonds with the incorporation of some step coupon bonds. Bond proceeds will be used to finance numerous construction and renovation projects located throughout the New York University system, totaling approximately $943 million. Those projects are described in detail on page 1 of the staff report. But just to highlight a couple of the high dollar amount projects, approximately $200 million will be used for the construction of a new 365,000 square foot science building for the School of Medicine, located at 435 East 30th Street. And $345 million will be used to transform 370 James Street in Brooklyn from an office building into an applied science academic and research center. So along with the recent acquisition of the former Polytechnic University, which is now known as the Tandon School of Engineering, this project will further increase NYU's presence in Brooklyn. The university's outstanding obligations are currently rated AA3 from Moody's and AA- from S&P. Accordingly, the university qualifies for an unsecured borrowing under DASNY's current financing guidelines. And then just to highlight some of the recent credit trends at New York University, NYU continues to experience strong demand and stable enrollment. The fall of 2015, the university received over 57,000 applications, which marked the 8th year in a row of record applications, and management indicates that number reached over 63,000 for fall of 2016. Most importantly, the university has remained selective with an acceptance ratio averaging 34% over 5 years, while its matriculation ratio has remained steady also at 34%. Total headcount for fall of 2015 was over 50,000. The university has remained very focused on the cost of education. Over the past 10 years, the budget for financial aid has tripled and now exceeds $300 million. And recently, the university announced the smallest annual increase in the overall cost of attendance in 20 years, increasing tuition by 2.9% for fall of 2016 and freezing the room and board rate at the 2015 rate. Also, NYU is currently embarked on the Momentum campaign, which is dedicated to raising $1 billion by 2017 for scholarships. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the additional debt through the proposed issuance. As reflected in the sources and uses in attachment 1, the new money issuance is currently estimated at just under $900 million. So a few important points on this dollar amount. Of the total amount of debt to be issued, approximately $550 million will be used to pay off the university's line of credit, which has been utilized to pay project costs on an ongoing basis. So when you look at the net number, NYU will be adding $350 million of additional debt onto their balance sheet. It's also important to point out that this covers the university's planned capital projects for fiscal years 2016 through 2018. So essentially, they're taking advantage of the current market rate, consolidating multiple years of capital projects into one issuance. And lastly, on the debt side, the proposed issuance includes a taxable component, which in prior years had been done away from DASNY. So for example, in 2015, the university issued $691 million, or excuse me, DASNY issued $691 million on behalf of the university, and at the same time, NYU issued its own taxable offering of $272 million. So it gives you the sense of magnitude from 2015 was along the same lines as this issuance. And then lastly, just looking at resources on NYU's balance sheet, total net assets were in excess of $5 billion, and unrestricted net assets were just over $2 billion for fiscal year 2015. And as we've pointed out to the members in the past, this balance sheet does not fully reflect the significant real estate holdings of NYU. The book value on the balance sheet is roughly $5 billion, which is significantly less than the estimated market value, which ranges between $10 and $14 billion. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Neil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Before you for consideration, as Dave had mentioned, are 3 series resolutions, which all are to be adopted under the authorities New York University Revenue Bond Resolution, which was adopted on May 28th, 2008. And the proceeds are to be loaned to New York University pursuant to that loan agreement that was also dated May 28th, 2008. As David mentioned, the three resolutions are requested to be adopted, which will allow for a series of tax-exempt bonds, which are currently anticipated to be issued as fixed-rate bonds with some stepped coupon bonds, an issuance of a series of taxable bonds, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in a few moments, as well as a 3rd series resolution to allow for flexibility in the event that opportunities were to arise, which would enable the deal to be more beneficial to the university. As Dave had mentioned, the maximum amount of bonds that may be issued under any series resolution and in the aggregate is $1,062,500,000. And as he had mentioned, we have circulated revisions to the bond council letter and the series resolutions to reflect a lower size, which is really meant to align with the amount of debt that the university has authorized for the specific projects that they anticipate being financed with this bond issue.
Good morning. I'll be speaking to the projects, the description of the projects. Regarding the projects to be financed, there are 5 of them. The largest component of them will be financed. Will finance the build-out and the gut renovation of a building acquired from New York City pursuant to a long-term lease at 370 J Street in Brooklyn. that building will house the university's Center for Urban Science and Progress as part of the School of Engineering and other engineering programs. The second project consists of the construction of a new science building at the university's Medical Center campus. The work is already in progress. The third project consists of the renovation and reconstruction of space on the university's Washington Square campus, primarily to be used by the university's various natural scientific departments. The fourth project consists of the build-out of a building acquired by the university at 404 Lafayette Street, including construction of a gymnasium and upfitting of the upper floors for academic and administrative use. And the fifth and final project consists of routine capital expenditures at the university law school's facilities.
As I mentioned earlier, one of the series of bonds to be issued will be issued as taxable bonds, and the university has requested to issue and anticipates issuing approximately 20% of the bonds as taxable bonds, which under new tax regulations which became effective last year would give the university some flexibility to use the projects in ways that may not always qualify for tax-exempt financing. The bonds are special obligations of the authority. They'll be payable from amounts held by the trustee under the resolution, which primarily consist of payments of principal and interest received by the authority under the loan agreement. The authority has assigned to the trustee the right to receive these revenues, and the bonds are secured by the funds and accounts held by the trustee under the resolution other than amounts on deposit in the arbitrage rebate fund. Each of the bonds issued under the general resolution, including the bonds proposed to be authorized today, will be on a parity with each other. They will not be secured by a debt service reserve fund, and the loan agreement itself and the payments thereunder are general obligations of the university. Those payments are not secured either by a mortgage or a pledge of revenues. However, pursuant to the authority's guidelines, if the university is not able to maintain certain threshold ratings from each of Fitch, S&P, and Moody's, the university will be required to engage a management consultant, and the resolution and the loan agreement, provides for reports to be submitted and implementation of the reports of the management consultant. The resolution also provides for, includes provisions for the issuance, redemption, and defeasance of additional bonds on behalf of the university, which may be issued to refund other debt of the university or to fund additional projects. Any additional debt issued pursuant to the general resolution would need to be approved pursuant to a series resolution by the board.
As far as the series resolution, first, all the series resolutions are identical except for their respective series designation. Second, as noted by Neil, the maximum amount of bonds to be issued under any series resolution or in the aggregate may not exceed $1,062,500,000, and the maximum amount of tax-exempt bonds that may be issued may not exceed $975 million. Third, each series resolution delegates to one authorized officer of DASNY the authority to determine certain terms of the financing. These determinations are to be made in one or more bond series certificates signed by an authorized officer of DASNY. Under the series resolution, the designated officer has the authority to determine the maximum principal amount of the bonds to be issued, subject to the limitations on principal amounts described above. That officer also can determine the maturity date or dates of the bonds, provided that no bonds will mature after July 1st following the 35th anniversary of the issue date. The officer will also determine interest rates, provided that the interest rates on fixed rate bonds and the initial interest rates
on variable rate bonds would not exceed 7% for tax-exempt bonds and 10% for taxable bonds. Note that some of the bonds will bear interest rate as debt coupon rates. Whether the officer will also determine whether the bonds are sold at public or private sale, and will also determine the denominations of the bonds, provided that the minimum denomination of the bonds that are not offered to the public may not be less than $100,000. And finally, that authorized officer will determine the redemption dates and prices of the bonds. Lastly, the series resolution also authorizes various authorized officers of DASNY to prepare and deliver a preliminary official statement for the bonds that are to be publicly offered. Those officers will prepare, execute, and deliver a final official statement for those bonds. Those officers will execute and deliver a bond purchase agreement, and they will also execute and deliver a continuing disclosure agreement with respect to publicly offered bonds, so as to enable the underwriter to conform with the SEC Rule 15C-12 under the Security Exchange Act of 1934. Those officers, authorized officers, will execute and deliver as well a placement agreement with respect to bonds to be sold pursuant to a direct placement. And finally, they would take such action and execute such documents as necessary or convenient in connection with the issuance of the bonds. Are there any questions?
Great. I also just wanted to add one point. The maximum interest rate on the tax-exempt bonds under the series resolutions is 7.5%.
Sorry, 7.5?
7.45 rather than 7.
Terrific. Thank you.
And again, we're happy to take any questions.
Questions for David or Gabriel or Neil? Yes, Sandra.
Probably for David. If we were to take Tandon and move it from the financial analysis of the combined, the fully merged entity, would we see that Tandon has contributed to the operating deficits, or is it almost entirely Sandy?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a combination. To answer your first question, no, it's not Tandon. That had sort of a minimal impact when you look at Tandon by itself. You know, I think the margins that you're seeing for 2014 and 2015 have a lot to do with Sandy and its impact on lost revenue at the School of Medicine. There's also, when you look at just the university side, and we got into this a little bit in the staff report, you know, there's some increased financial aid, which brought down revenue a little bit for 14 and 15. And there was also some increases on the expense side. So there's a couple different pieces to that, but the Tandon merger had virtually no impact on those margins for 14 and 15.
Should the Sandy impact be passed now?
Yes, yeah. So we already saw some of that in 2015. A lot of the insurance funds had come in. So I think operations on the School of Medicine side are back to normal.
And finally, one other question, if you'd go back to that sources and uses, I got a little lost about where I found where they're paying back the debt.
I'm sorry.
It was a repayment of debt that you referenced.
Oh, so a lot of the projects are already underway. So as the university incurs costs, they're using their line of credit to pay for those costs. At the time of closing, they estimate that amount to be about $550 million. So essentially, that's already on their balance sheet. And once the bonds are issued, it will be used to pay off that line in full.
So that's already showing up in the debt analysis that's in here?
Correct.
Then, okay, that was what I thought you were saying. It wasn't clear. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
So moved.
Thank you, Sandra. Jerry, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Before you all leave, I want to thank you and staff. This is certainly one of the largest not-for-profit transactions we've ever done. I'm sure it required a great deal of diligence and a lot of hard work, and I want to thank you all specifically, but staff generally, for getting this done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Behind tab 7 is the Bright Point Health and Bright Point Care transaction. Matt Bergen will present the credit summary and staff report.
Thank you. The next three financings that are being brought to the board are all privately placed transactions. They're going to be privately placed with three different banks, and there will be no ratings as they're privately placed transactions. So let's begin with the first one. The financing provided to the members presents a 15-year bond issue in an amount not to exceed $12 million on behalf of Bright Point Health and Bright Point Care, which are nonprofit organizations that deliver specialized health care and support services to individuals throughout New York City. The projects that you're considering this morning are the refinancing of the New York City Industrial Development Agency Civic Facility Revenue Bonds Series 2006, as well as the construction of a 26,000 square foot health center. The security features will include mortgages on certain property, as well as a first priority lien on all non-real estate assets. For this private placement, the proposed purchaser is Bank United, and it is anticipated that the bonds will have a variable rate of interest. The institution is contemplating entering into an interest rate swap to provide it with a synthetic fixed rate, and they have been advised that we will be looking for them to have a swap advisor, which they acknowledged. Regarding the institutions, they provide services at diagnostic and treatment centers or through adult day health care and mental health home programs. The services include specialized primary care as well as dental and mental health care, outpatient substance abuse treatment, and counseling, and their services are noted in the staff report. Many of the services are provided to individuals with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level. These are essential services and are supported mainly through Medicaid reimbursement, as over 98% of their net patient service revenue is comprised of either Medicaid or Medicaid managed care. The institutions benefit from enhanced reimbursement and eligibility for various federal grants through the Federally Qualified Health Center Program, or the FQHC program. By design, an FQHC exists to serve those who have limited access to health care or those who are uninsured. FQHCs provide comprehensive primary and preventative care to persons of all ages, regardless of their ability to pay, and are a critical component of the healthcare safety net. FQHCs are typically based in medically underserved areas or an area that has been designated as a health professional shortage area. And to conclude, Bright Point Health and Bright Point Care have a common board. They have combined financial statements, and it is currently expected that Bright Point Care will either be a co-borrower or a guarantor, although the indications are that it will be the latter. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'll point out, as was pointed out in yesterday's Finance Committee meeting, that we do have an approval, a contingent approval from the Department of Health for this transaction. Are there questions for Matt? We can approve it with a majority, but
Motion.
Yes, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you very much. Is there a second? Thank you, Jerry. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. The record will reflect that that Ms. Shepard was not present for the vote. Matt, thanks. I guess you get to stay seated.
Thank you.
Behind tab 8 is the Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation transaction. Matt Bergen will present the credit summary and staff report.
Thank you. The next financing before the board presents a 27-year bond issue in an amount not to exceed $42 million on behalf of Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation, which is a nursing home located on the Queens and Nassau border. Excuse me. The projects that you're considering this morning are the refinancing of Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation's taxable construction loans with M&T Bank, as well as various renovations and upgrades to the facility. The security features will include a mortgage on certain property, as well as a pledge of gross receipts and a payment guarantee from the Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation Foundation. For this private placement transaction, the proposed purchaser is M&T Bank, and again, they are anticipating issuing the bonds with a variable rate of interest, and the institution is contemplating entering into an interest rate swap to provide it with a synthetic fixed rate. And again, they have been advised that we will be looking for them to have a swap advisor, which they acknowledged. Regarding the institution, they have experienced high occupancy rates, which have averaged nearly 97% over the last 5 years. They have the benefit of the Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation Foundation, and the foundation has approximately $32.5 million of cash and investments, and was founded for the purpose of raising funds specifically for the benefit of the institution. And to conclude, the completion of the renovations will help assure their competitiveness in the future. Mr. Chairman.
Matt, thank you. Are there questions for Matt about this transaction? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it? Roman, thank you. Is there a second? John Johnson, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. One more, Matt?
One more.
Behind tab 9 is the Providence Rest transaction. Matt Bergen will present the credit summary and staff report.
Thank you. The final staff report provided to the members presents a 19-year bond issue in an amount not to exceed $27 million on behalf of Providence Rest, which is a nursing home located in the Bronx. The project that you're considering this morning is the refunding of DASNY's Providence Rest Insured Revenue Bonds, Series 2005. The Series 2005 bonds were issued to finance upgrades and renovations to the facility, and that was a publicly offered issue that was insured by ACA Capital. The security features will include a mortgage on certain property, as well as a pledge of gross receipts. And for this private placement, the proposed purchaser is Sterling National Bank, and it is anticipated that the bonds will be issued in a fixed rate of interest in a term mode. Regarding the institution, they have an excellent liquidity position as they've averaged over 165 days of operating cash available for the last 5 years. Regarding their balance sheet and other balance sheet ratios, the institution's current assets, total unrestricted net assets, cash to debt ratio, current ratio, and cushion ratio have all improved over time. And many of the institution's financial ratios are at levels that exceed both the statewide and DASNY medians. And to conclude, regarding the refunding, it is anticipated that it will provide the institution with annual gross savings of slightly over $1 million and a net present value benefit of approximately $6.8 million. Mr. Chairman.
Matt, thank you. Are there questions for Matt? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Tracy, thank you very much. Is there a second? Jerry, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Matt, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move to the management reports, but before we do, let me tell you what's about to happen, give you some sense. We're going to try a new methodology and a streamlined methodology of doing the management reports. The President will give his report, and then he will call on the leaders of our two lines of business, Portia and Steve, to give reports. Those reports may be given by Portia or by a designee of hers, by Steve or a designee of his. Once those reports are done, and those will be the regular, that'll be the way in which the process will proceed. Once those reports are finished, I will call on each of the other managing directors to supplement their material in the book. If they have nothing with which to supplement what you've already read, then you'll be given an opportunity to ask questions about what they've read, about what you've read. And if there are no questions, we'll move through the remaining managing directors fairly quickly. And if there are questions, of course, you'll have the opportunity to take your time to ask those questions. Was that clear? Yes. Okay. Thank you. That said, we'll move now to the management reports, the first being the President's.
Good morning. As Al mentioned, my report to you will include high-level commentary from each of our business units. It is in part of an effort to provide you with a wider array of information across DASNY, wider and deeper. I will walk you through this information. You will still hear directly, as indicated previously, from Portia Lee and Steve Kuro. And of course, you can ask questions of any of our leaders as usual. Starting today and going forward, you will receive the monthly presentations from our business leaders and members of their staff, if time permits. These presentations may outline a service we provide or walk you through a particular project that has come together. Today, you'll hear from Steve Kuro, who has a presentation on the capabilities of our construction division. Before we get into that, I will describe to you improvements we have made for our healthcare clients, a Northwell study on healthcare delivery in Brooklyn, and a brief description of my recent remarks to the Building Trades Employers Association. That will be followed by the business unit updates. As you all know, when I arrived at DASNY, it's been 1 year this month, I embarked on a listening tour. I met with our regular borrowers and financial industry partners. In December, with your help, we acted upon what we learned and made changes to our financing guidelines and policies. Those changes give our clients greater speed, certainty, and flexibility. We continue to deepen DASNY's relationships with our clients. Over the last several weeks, Portia Lee, Andy Purcell, Matt Bergen, and I met with Memorial Sloan Kettering, New York University Hospital Center, Mount Sinai Hospital, and Northwell Health. These clients were particularly interested to learn about the Department of Health's significantly improved requisition process for bond finance capital expenditures. Working closely with the New York State Department of Health, we have transformed a once cumbersome and lengthy process into a streamlined and efficient review. 3 sets of hard copies of supporting documentation delivered to DOH have been replaced by 1 electronic submission. The supporting documentation has been reduced to a 5 or 6 page submission to DOH, and reviews and approvals are now occurring within 10 days, expediting the reimbursement to the client. Our hospital, nursing home, and other healthcare clients can now quickly and efficiently access their funds. They no longer need to worry about their idle money and negative arbitrage. Instead, they can focus on growing and strengthening their institutions. DOH will continue to play an important role in determining that funds are being spent appropriately. I would like to thank Tracy, who's joined us today, Dr. Zucker, and the rest of the colleagues at DOH for their work on this important initiative. This is a very important initiative. This is one in which many of the institutions that we service and work with are very excited and will be very helpful. The other aspect is last month, DOH awarded a grant to Northwell Health to prepare a study that will identify options to dramatically improve the quality of health care in central and northeastern Brooklyn. The study will explore potential management of partnership arrangements among Brooklyn's hospitals in these communities. The area is served by Brookdale Medical Center, Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center, Interfaith Medical Center, Wyckoff Heights Medical Center, SUNY's University Hospital of Brooklyn. These 5 hospitals operate in communities with higher than average rates of obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. They also have measurably higher rates of infant mortality, congestive heart failure, and substance abuse. Emergency rooms often serve as a source of primary care. As you know, these hospitals have incurred significant financial losses and have had little to no access to capital. Just to remain open, it is projected that Brookdale, Interfaith, Kingsbrook, and Wyckoff will require $300 million in direct state operating assistance this year. The state is seeking alternatives to strengthen and protect continued access to care and improve its quality. It has authorized $700 million to support projects consistent with those goals. DASNY has long supported the delivery of healthcare across New York State. We work to keep New York's healthcare institutions competitive and financially sound. That role will continue in Brooklyn as we work with our partners at the Department of Health, Northwell, and the Brooklyn hospitals. Now, remarks to the Building Trades Association. Last month, I had the opportunity to address the Building Trades Employers Association. They are an important audience for DASNY and certainly the state. The association is an umbrella organization that represents contracted trade groups and associations from a variety of fields. They represent the construction companies that work hand in hand with us to deliver projects. I reminded them of the important work DASNY does across New York as one of the state's biggest public builders and as the #1 issuer of tax-exempt bonds in the nation. I provided an update on the governor's budget. In particular, I described his record $100 billion investment in infrastructure and development. I also described upcoming opportunities through DASNY, including work on the $250 million South Beach Psychiatric Center and the $150 million Fashion Institute of Technology project. Now, as it relates to the group Specialized Services and Client Solutions update headed by Caprice, sustainability continues to be part of our Specialized Services and Client Solutions division. They work with communications and marketing to coordinate DASNY's involvement, most recently in I Love My Parks Day on May 7th. This is a statewide event hosted by our client, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. The event puts volunteers to work beautifying parks across our state. We identified 3 parks where employees could volunteer close to each of the 3 main offices. It was a great opportunity, family fun. Lots of colleagues across DASNY participated. More than a dozen DASNY employees and their family members were present. They helped prepare grounds for summer traffic. It was a beautiful day, and fun was had by all. As it relates to finance, from our finance division, our operating reserves were essentially unchanged for the month. Healthcare Reform Act reserves decreased by $300,000, primarily as a result of advances totaling $2.2 million to Wyckoff Heights Medical Center and Brooks Memorial Hospital. Through March, expenses continue to be slightly less than projected budget. In our public finance and portfolio monitoring update, as you can see, public finance and portfolio monitoring has been very busy. We've had a lot of activity. While they're pursuing major and important financing across this state, they're also seeking out new opportunities. Among them is developing a relationship with the New York State Green Bank. Portia, Art Ware, Dan Petroff, and I recently met with the leadership of the bank. We discussed identifying opportunities to work together, including through our tax-exempt equipment leasing program. In March, you in particular approved a $13.9 million TELP lease for the Hebrew Home for the Aged at Riverdale. That deal laid the groundwork for the relationship we are now building. It will help finance energy conservation measures at the home. The discussion with the Green Bank was very positive, and I will continue to provide updates as we expand the relationship. By partnering on financing, DASNY and the Green Bank can help make New York more sustainable and resilient. I will now turn the floor over to Portia Lee, who has a market update.
Thank you. Thank you, Board. My standard reports are in your board book. Since the last board meeting, my report reflects the pricing of the Columbia transaction, Fordham, Cornell, and Memorial Sloan Kettering. I would also note that since that written report, we also placed last week the school district refunding, as well as the Pratt Institute financing, and we're actually in the market today with NYUHC. Brief market update, the calendar this week is approximately $8 billion. Cash continues to flow into the municipal market. Last week was about $700 million coming in. This is the 31st consecutive week inflows. Transactions are seeing good demand and pricing at good levels. MMD today as compared to last month is fairly similar. 1 year is 0.56 as it was at the April board meeting. The 10-year is 1.56 as compared to 1.62 at the last board meeting, and 30-year is 2.48 as compared to 2.57 at the April board meeting. The other thing I would note is that there is a revised negotiable plan report, which we had previously, which also reflected the change in the NYU not to exceed amount, which that NYU transaction was considered earlier today. The other thing I would just note, and I think you can see as you look at my written reports, is that the financings are moving pretty quickly from the inquiry stage to really coming to the board for your consideration.
Thank you, Portia. May I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss financial and credit histories of particular corporations? Thank you, Roman. Sandra, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 The ayes have it. We're going to ask Gerard and Mike Cusack, Mike Corrigan, and Debbie.
All right, we've just come out of the executive session. No action was taken. We're moving on, and we'll move back to the president's report. Gerard?
Thank you. As it relates to construction, we are constantly looking at ways we can become more efficient throughout DASNY. The construction division is certainly playing an important role in that. Among the changes they are making is the implementation of a new front end to our project scheduling system. Previously, design and construction managers provided schedule updates to a select group who then entered the data. Now project managers will be able to directly enter data into the new front-end system. The change will save time and improve accuracy of monthly reporting and schedules. I will now hand the baton over to Steve Kuro, who will provide an update on some of our construction projects. He will also deliver a presentation I mentioned earlier. Steve?
Thank you.
The only caveat you have now is...
How much time do I have?
I think people have to get out of
25
here
minutes.
By about 1:45, 10 to 1. So I guess you can...
Should I do the presentation next time?
No, you can do it now.
What do you...
It's fine. You
do the presentation?
We can't do it in June.
How long's the presentation?
20 minutes if I do a half a minute a slide.
Oh.
Honestly, we said this was something that was important in
Yes,
our
I think we should do it.
governance committee. This was an area people didn't understand as well. I'd rather have plenty of time.
I would too.
I'm sorry, so the suggestion is that we ask Steve to...
If we're going to lose a quorum before they can finish, I'd rather do it when we have plenty of time.
Is
to
that a
ask
risk?
questions.
Is there a risk we're going to lose quorum? Then we don't really have a choice. I'd like for everybody. Steve, I'm sorry, we've asked you, this is the second delay.
Well, the good news is it gets revised with each delay.
It's getting better.
Has turned an engineer presentation into a more palatable presentation.
I don't think any of us anticipated such a long executive session, and I apologize to you.
Don't apologize. Next time's fine.
All right.
I'll just do my monthly report. Behind tab 13 are the construction division reports. On the construction projects report, the cover shows a photo of an emergency generator replacement project. The customer is OMH. It's located at Hutchings Site Center in Syracuse, New York. The project scope was to replace emergency generators in 3 buildings on the Hutchings PC campus. The work included selective demolition, removal of existing generators, and the installation of transfer switches, diesel generators, and fuel lines. The project budget was $375,000. Design started in August of 2013 and completed in September of 2014, and Pathfinder engineers were the design consultants. Construction started in June of 15, completed in December of 15, and Matco Electric was the contractor. The challenges associated with the project were just to keep the facility up and running while we transferred the emergency generators out with new ones, making sure the patient's medical equipment was up and running full-time. In the same report, we've got the final 15-16 construction division expenditures in at $611 million, down from $743 million the prior fiscal year. A few brief project updates at the Court Officers Training Academy. I visited that project last week on Thursday, May 5th. I attended the bi-weekly project meeting. Activity on the project has increased, including placement of concrete floor slabs in 2 of the buildings. Light gauge metal frame wall framing is being installed, installation of ductwork, and exterior envelope work, including brick restoration and roofing materials, all ongoing. We're meeting with the general contractor next week to continue discussions regarding performance. At Bernard Feinson, 7 and 8, the project continues to progress toward the finish line. All trades are very active. Commissioning and building systems continue, as well as some finish work as we push toward an early summer completion. And lastly, at South Beach, 4 of the 5 bid packages have been received, opened, and we're vetting them at this time. Bid package 5, which is the largest of the 5 packages, which includes general construction, fit out, and MEP, is scheduled to be open on May 19th. A number of projects that I typically report on, I won't be really in the future based on the fact that they're finishing up. The canopy at Root, ASRC, Staten Island, and Bronx Mental Health. On the program front, 2 updates. First, Gozer, the 75 project community redevelopment program, valued at over $150 million. Those projects are being progressed through our design staff. We have 14 design phase managers now applied to that project, set of projects. We've also moved some management staff around to help us with the overall management of the program. And we have 2 civil engineers soon to be joining us who specialize in the type of projects that program offers. And lastly, on NYCHA, the 10 security projects with the highest priority are moving through the scoping process with the housing development boards. We seek their approval before we can move forward. So that's happening. The next set of projects under consideration for security work are being scoped by our CMs. We expect to get that information by the end of this week. And lastly, we've begun discussions with NYCHA on the purchasing of appliances for the residents. There was an $8 million cutout from the $100 million appropriation for that scope of work. And just lastly, on resources, we continue to recruit. We have about 20 active recruitments today ongoing in the construction division. That concludes my report.
That's terrific. Mr. President, we're still in your report, but I'll ask the board whether they have any questions for Steve before you. Questions for Steve? Hearing none, Mr.
Thank you. Before I conclude, I want to highlight a few events we have between now and the June meeting. First and foremost, we certainly want to applaud that our very own Portia Lee is to receive the 2016 Public Service Award from the Municipal Forum of New York. It's an incredible and highly deserved recognition of Portia's commitment to public service. I haven't even looked at her. I'm sure she's, trying to hide. But Portia is clearly a leader. She pushes DASNY in New York State every day. She is a very valuable very valuable partner and leader at DASNY, and we certainly applaud your work. We're proud of it. Thank you very much. I open it up for each and every one of you. Let's clap for it. And thank you for those of you who could join us. I know it is a little tough for a lot of you, given where we are stationed across the state, but thank you. On May 25, DASNY is hosting our own MWBE networking event in Albany. As I had said to you, I know we have had a tremendous amount of success hosting these previously. As we went out and started talking to folks, they felt that they were missing our connectivity. So we're not here to preempt what the governor does across the state. We felt very strongly that it was important for DASNY to have a presence once again. And so these will be smaller venues. Right now we're doing 2. And next year we'll figure out what else we need to do.
Let me say that I think that is a terrific idea. I didn't know you were doing that, but the DASNY MWBE conference, until it became the state's MWBE conference, was a huge draw for a lot of people here in the city, people I know, people who made it their business to be there. And you're right, there is a different aura in the state's ownership of this thing. The state does a terrific job, but I get questions all the time about whether DASNY might consider doing something on a smaller scale. And sure enough, we're doing it.
We're
Thank you
definitely
for
doing
that.
it. Yeah, we're definitely doing it. Thank you. And we'll certainly share the dates with you. So if you're interested in attending, one is in New York City and one is in Albany.
I'd love to come. I'd love to come.
On May 26th, I'll be addressing members of the New York Building Congress on our infrastructure work. And that concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions for Gerard? Hearing none. Kimberly, in the new format, do you have anything to add to the written report that we have had a chance to look at in the book?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Mike, you've
Nothing
been
to
very
add,
active
everything's
today.
covered, yes.
All right, thank you. Caprice?
Nope, nothing.
Nothing to add? Okay, all right. Then I think, are there questions for anyone? From anyone? Hearing none, it would appear that we've come to the end of the agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled in Albany for the 22nd of June. Please be reminded that that meeting includes the audit report and the presence of the auditors, so it's likely to be a bit long. Steve, I don't know how we'll work it out, but
I'll just go first.
I was actually going to suggest that if Gerard is comfortable with that, then let's have you early, just so we can get that done.
Auditors can wait.
What's that?
Auditors can wait. They're independent contractors.
Yeah, of course they can wait. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure we should. I'm not sure we should make them wait. Hearing there being no further business, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn the meeting? Thank you very much. Second, Gerard. Thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. We stand adjourned.
Okay.